We handle some cases against the police department, and some cases for example, a false arrest case, and that's when the police are acting a little too quickly and not acting as they should in the normal course of their business as a police officer. I represented a woman in Staten Island who was, I want to describe her as a church-going woman. She had that look about her as somebody who was very involved in her church and told me all about it. And one day she was having her car repaired, and she went to pick up the car after closing, and she went to the shop and her car wasn't there. She didn't know what to do. She went home, and after a while, she called the police and said, "I think my car was stolen from this shop," and reported it and gave her name and reported her car being stolen. A couple hours later, her son came home, and he said, "Mom, I picked up the car. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I picked up the car." And so she called the police back, and she said, "My son picked up the car for me." And the police on the other end said, "Well, I'll use the name Mrs. Smith." It was a very common name. "Mrs. Smith, you should be worried about the warrant that's out for your arrest." Of course, this lady, the thought of ever being arrested anywhere was just beyond her imagination. And she said, "What do you mean?" And "I've never been arrested in my life, and I don't know. I've never even got a ticket." And they said, "Well, you better come down tomorrow and speak to the DA." So she went down to the courthouse. This happened in Staten Island. And she went to the DA's office, and the DA said, "Sit in the courtroom, and we'll be right with you." While she was sitting in the courtroom, a policeman came to her and said, "You are Mrs. Smith?" "Yes." And he handcuffs her and throws them into this old danky cell in the basement that had drug addicts and prostitutes that proceeded to abuse her and hit her and threaten her for the next 6 hours until finally the police realized that the prostitute and a drug addict and was 15 years younger than my client was not the same Mrs. Smith that they had down in their cellar in their prison. So as a result of that, my client was severely traumatized, suffered post-traumatic stress, could not get back on, was afraid to leave her house in fear that the police would make the same mistake again, and proceeded to put 6 bolts on her door and cameras in her apartment. She was never the same. And we went to trial and got a verdict for her, and it was enough to hopefully give her some closure to it. Hopefully spread the message to the police that you don't just throw people in jail without checking some basic things like the date of birth of a person or the Social Security number of a person. You check that first before you put somebody in jail.